Hello, guys and gals. Me, Mutahar, and back in 2018, there was the World Economic Forum that posted an interesting quote: "You will own nothing, and you'll be happy." Now, I remember this quote making waves. A lot of people basically used it as an excuse to talk about, this crazy world we're living in, where you're actually literally not going to be owning anything. They will make you eat the bugs, and you will like it. Now, the thing about all of this is, ladies and gentlemen, I don't necessarily want to jump entirely into the conspiracy theory land, but remember, a conspiracy theory is kind of, to me, I always have talked about it for the last 8 years on my channel, especially when covering things on the dark web, where I always say that I believe pretty much conspiracy theories where a lot of money is involved and rich people love to exploit the average person, right? That's the conspiracy I usually end up believing in, right? So to me, whenever I see conspiracies where big companies can take away what we own and charge us monthly fees for it just so we can have the privilege of accessing, things like television, things like movies, things like basic information, our video games, I actually do believe it, because ultimately a way to bleed the people dry out of money just so a couple rich CEOs can get even richer is a conspiracy I totally can believe. Now, why am I actually talking about this? Well, I am a gamer, okay? I play video games, I talk about video games, I enjoy video games, and I've done it on this channel. But something that obviously has kind of blown my mind is, if you've actually read in the last day, Nvidia is apparently trying to cut gaming GPU production by 30 to 40% in 2026. So first off, I wanted to actually figure out, is this true? Is this actually valid information? And a lot of it comes from the Chinese board channels and Chinese discussions. So for instance, on benchlife.info, thankfully translated to English, you can see right over here that, again, the actual information here came out that both AMD and NVIDIA, who actually started, specifically NVIDIA, the whole AI thing, where, again, a lot of the hardware that a lot of these AI companies use, RAM, disk storage, GPUs, a lot of this stuff works really well. So for us gamers who are out there playing games on our computer, that same hardware can be used to get a bunch of models to spit out information at us for AI to work the way that it does. These AI companies are so massive and so large that they're effectively buying up all of this hardware, basically making sure that none of us have access to anything. So according to China's Bobantang, the news here mentioned that NVIDIA is going to adjust their GPU production capacity of the 50 series GPUs, those really expensive AI-driven GPUs where it's like, hold on, pal, it's just like the 4090s. They were looking at, like, I think the 5070 or whatever the hell it was, and they were like, don't worry, man, by duplicating the frames and whatnot, by, by AI magic, we'll make it just as good as native. Yeah, those actual series of cards are going to be facing shortages because of memory issues, because there's not enough memory to go around anymore, ladies and gentlemen. So again, this is from again a Chinese Chinese news over here. So again, honestly, I want more discussions out of this, but I wouldn't really be totally surprised if Nvidia is having issues. Again, we'll go into why that is, but even if you're the richest company in the world, supply chains are a problem. So what they do say is the memory and NAND out-of-stock issues will not improve in a short amount of time, and 2026 should be a grim year for many brands. So, and that's not really a shock to many people, but if you actually go look at how memory is made, so for instance, RAM, and again, RAM is different depending on which type of configuration you're going for. So, DDR5, DDR2, which the only reason I'm thinking of DDR2 right now is that there was actually like a scam where somebody was like sold DDR5, but it ended up being like DDR2 memory. Not exactly fun to get scammed, especially with tech-related shit. But looking at Micron's website, for instance, and they discuss how RAM, for instance, is made, and a lot of computer chips and silicon are processed this way too. So for instance, taking silicone to a finished wafer means that you deal with silicone ingots, you deal with complex, production processes like photolithography, photoresisting, etching, aluminum layering, passivation layering. I mean, it is complicated, okay? It is not a simple process. And there's a reason why, I see a lot of people like, why don't we just make more fucking RAM? Why don't we just make more GPUs, Muda? Well, it's because it's not like cutting down a tree, okay? There's a lot of complicated processes, and it's such a complicated system that to do. It's such a complicated thing to do that the amount of people that are able to do this process are very limited in the world, and the companies that can do this are also very limited in the world too. Have you ever heard of a company known as TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company? They are by far one of the leading people in this space. Almost every large company basically goes to them to produce, chips for them, right? And again, their competitors are very few and very far between. So ultimately, a very small amount of people can basically create this. It almost feels like we found alien technology and very few people know how to produce it. Therefore, shortages are a thing. And that's just how the case is. That's just how things are going to be even far into the future. You can't just make new fabs in a span of like months, even in this case. You can't just make new companies out of nowhere. It takes a lot of logistics, it takes a lot of talent to put this kind of stuff together. So the shortages me and you and every gamer face are issues that we're going to be facing for a couple of years now. Now, to give you guys a quick idea of this too, obviously, if you go to, again, your local computer stores, you'll find that, graphics cards like the 5070 Ti, and in some cases, even the RX 9070 Ti are usually sold above MSRP, and they're usually prime for scalping. For a lot of gamers who want these cards, unfortunately, a lot of AI bros want this shit as well too. Now, companies like Nvidia, and I'm pointing Nvidia out specifically, they've almost never been for the gamer in some cases, like maybe early on. But remember a few years ago when crypto was like the biggest thing ever, and a lot of the crypto bros kept buying every card and putting it into their crypto clusters so they could just farm fucking Bitcoin or mine for Bitcoin out there. Yeah, no matter what Nvidia did, and even the paltry little stopgaps they put into the software, these people are just buying up these cards, making them not available for gamers. And even if these cards would eventually end up in gamers' hands, they would be so abused because of the 100% CPU utilization they were going through that buying them secondhand was almost impossible. I mean, would you buy a vehicle that was driven for 300,000 miles, at all? Even if it was like a Japanese vehicle, right? Shit that lasts basically longer than anyone. I still wouldn't buy it, okay? I still wouldn't go out and choose to purchase it. Imagine buying a secondhand GPU from something that was in an AI data center. I mean, Jesus Christ, that thing has double the mileage I just talked about. It's crazy shit. Now, no matter what, companies like Nvidia, and let's not, bandy around, AMD probably will also just exclusively have whatever stock they have and sell it to these companies because ultimately they're the ones that can pay top dollar. So for a lot of you gamers out there, and this is just for Americans, right? The average salary is $63,795. Depending on which state you live, that number can be substantially lower and that number can be substantially higher. But no matter what, right? People are facing economic issues, okay? There is not a lot of money to go around. There's not a lot of fucking disposable income to go around. So for people who want to, eat, pay their rent, do something in their life, they might have to give up things like PC gaming for a little bit, right? Because if you can't afford, if you can't afford like a bundle of RAM, let alone a GPU, CPU case, everything out there, you might have to stop the gaming journey, right? You might have to stop thinking of buying computer hardware. And that just doesn't mean gamers, that means people who probably were looking for a new desktop tower, maybe something like a new laptop that wasn't, entry-level specs, which now have to be sold more because we can't afford to give 16 gigabytes of RAM, 32 gigabytes of RAM as easily as we could, right? It's not as easy to buy those configurations and mass produce these laptops because a lot of the AI bros just kind of have consumed everything around us. Really, if you look at artificial intelligence, I want to ask you how many positives you've seen in the world as opposed to the negatives at the moment. For a lot of gamers out there, the unfortunate reality is projects like GeForce Now, Xbox Cloud Gaming might be one of the last few bastions for some people, especially in like the lower income space of gaming to actually play some of these video games. And who knows how long this goes for? I mean, the conspiracy to me has always just kind of been, and this is something that I've been thinking of the last few weeks. I feel like a lot of these prices that have gone up for computer parts and computers in general have basically pivoted the world to a direction where I think a lot of these companies, especially big tech companies, honestly want the user to not even have a computer anymore, not even have a laptop anymore. Imagine not even having the ability to run something like a very basic operating system. I feel like companies like Microsoft would enjoy if instead of buying your own computer, you had a thin client that could just connect to Microsoft Windows in the cloud and use a computer in the cloud. I feel like for a lot of these companies like Nvidia or gaming companies, they probably enjoy it if people paid like 12 bucks a month, 15 bucks a month, whatever it may be, to buy a subscription to access a gaming PC in the cloud. And they'll probably tell you that, like, hey, you'll save money in the long term by just renting your computer. But you now don't actually own your actual computer anymore. One of the reasons why I always disliked things like Stadia was that I think cloud gaming, is one of those things that's also impossible to like truly enjoy, simply because latency and a lot of these factors will always be there. That compression blur on a video is always there. But the other thing that gets me out of here is that when you take away computer software and you put it behind a server that you can only stream video from, that means owning your software becomes that much more difficult. We live in a day and age where, things like stop killing games have become a mainstream mention simply because people want to own the shit that they buy. If you spend $60 on a game like, I don't know, Dune Awakening, or actually that's a bad example, that's an MMO, but let's say you wanted to buy something like Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered, you should be allowed to own that game. You should be allowed to own that experience for a long time. We live in a day and age where companies can remove media and take it away at any given moment. For instance, instead of streaming, like instead of going to Netflix or any of these services like Amazon Prime, which actually I think Amazon Prime I still have because I use Prime delivery all the time, I have now resorted to using projects like Jellyfin to stream movies. So instead of paying monthly for subscription services for movies, what I do is, let's say I want to watch The Boys, I just buy a DVD of The Boys once. Once I spend my money on this, I get the DVD, I rip it, and then I go to Jellyfin where I locally host my own server on in my house. And then through the server, I can watch all my TV shows like Arrested Development. Let's say I wanted to watch movies like, I don't know, Menace to Society, one of my favorite little 90s Los Angeles gangster movies. I watched it very recently, absolutely a banger movie. And the thing about it is that instead of going to Netflix or any of these services to purchase or rent the movie, which half the time is taken away. I mean, seriously, look up something on Google for Netflix and count the amount of times on your hand, how many times it's been taken away. No, I'm not going to spin up a VPN to connect through a random country just to access a video file. I will just buy the DVD and I will copy it over to a local server and I will just watch it on my home network or stream it outside. That is the stage that I'm on. Even so far as search engines, I've gotten to a point where I literally just run my own search engines now. So instead of relying on things like Google search, I can just host my own search meta engine and just browse the internet like this. So instead of sending out my information, I can just privately browse and keep things local, right? Self-hosting is one of those things that is going to become so huge, I feel, in the next couple years when people find out they don't need a subscription service to do every single thing out in the world. And the thing about it is that I'm not one of those people that looks at something with the most optimistic viewpoint because I believe that blind optimism is pretty damaging. Look, a lot of people compare AI to this big bubble, like the dot-com bubble, for instance. And if you actually look into the dot-com bubble, like just a quick view of it, obviously one of the biggest things for the internet was the release of a lot of these browsers. So for instance, this is the NCSA Mosaic browser, one of the first popular internet browsers in the world. And here I'm on the first website in the world, infokern.ch. Now, the internet used to be quite simple, right? We used to just pull up small little kilobytes of information on the internet to browse. But obviously the internet expanded. You're watching a fucking full-on video now, which used to be considered impossible when the internet first dropped, okay? Back in the days when we were literally on dial-up modems. So obviously when the internet started to become used, right, when you read into it, a percentage of households just in the US owning computers increased from 15 to 35%. And that ownership of a computer meant that instead of it being a luxury like toy, it actually became something that you would need to live life in this futuristic age that we were in. So the dot-com bubble basically started when a lot of companies started to create, a lot of startups formed, creating their own dot-com, site. So a lot of these websites would, actually dwindle and dissolve because they really didn't provide any benefit. So one of the most popular things that you heard of was probably like pets.com, which didn't really amount to much. So for instance, pets.com is kind of like the face of the dot-com bubble crash. And if you go to pets.com, yeah, it looked pretty cute. You can buy stuff for dogs, cats, fishes, and birds, right? And ultimately, this was one of the first sort of crashes, if you actually look into it, because ultimately, in the end, the company failed to become profitable. And a lot of these companies, these dot-com companies, literally they were given tons of cash infused into them, and they would not actually generate any revenue. So ultimately, for a lot of the investors who wanted their ROI, they were like, well, fuck it. The internet's kind of this like touchy subject. But that didn't mean every company crashed, right? Obviously, companies like Google remained, and even companies that hurt hard, like Amazon, they ended up obviously coming back. Because when you take this new emerging technology, and the dot-com bubble crash kind of goes all the way back to other big technology-based bubbles like railroads, the telephone, for instance, anything of this nature, right? Anytime there is a new piece of technology like artificial intelligence, there is a lot of speculation in this bubble economy that forms around it because nobody really understands anything about it. Nobody gets it other than like a few nerds. And until people finally, once the smoke clears, people realize who you're going to go after. So the point of all this is even if the AI bubble crashes, and it probably will, it'll probably correct itself. It doesn't mean companies like OpenAI are going anywhere, right? Because they're one of the biggest in the games. It doesn't mean that companies like Google will go anywhere because they're one of the fastest growing AI companies in the game. It'll probably mean that the smaller, lower tier shitter companies that aren't actually doing much will actually dissipate. But the people that are using artificial intelligence for actual important purposes, or companies that have aligned themselves with the US government or the Chinese government, in this manner, are going to stick around. You're telling me a company that is providing military services to the US government isn't going to be around forever? Get the fuck out of here. That's the only thing America still makes these days that is worth a damn, okay? Weapons and killing people. When you look at companies or countries like China, where they've infused so much money into a lot of these industries, half of them taken over by the government, you think they're going to just ignore this? You think they're not going to be using it for their own personal gains or, using it in some actual, application? Of course they are. And because of this, these companies are going to stick around, and these prices will probably correct themselves, but it'll still generally, in my opinion, be a little bit more expensive than what it already than it used to be. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the big thing for me, the conspiracy that really hits up is I think the days of home ownership of a lot of this stuff is going to become more enthusiast as time goes on. It already used to be that the people that built their own gaming computers like this were a very small fraction of people, just small nerds. Now it's going to be an even smaller fraction of people, and those nerds are generally going to be richer than one would expect. But I think for the average consumer, I feel like there's this disturbing trend where I think companies like Microsoft, companies like Nvidia, hell, I think at some point companies like Apple will probably be okay with selling you lower like powered material, like lower powered hardware, like thin clients at this point, and just tell you, hey, connect to the cloud, man. It's more convenient. Everything that you ever do will be connected into a server, and the ownership of any media, any television product, any video game, any piece of software that you once took for granted is just not going to be there. Unless, of course, you stick to the open source options, right? And this is one of the reasons why, like, I love things like Linux. I love open source projects because, at the end of the day, it's the only it almost feels like you're in counterculture, right? It almost feels like you're countering the mainstream, and not just for the sake of doing it, because it is the only real alternative you have. Is Linux perfect? Is open source stuff perfect? No. But is it a good alternative to some of the mainstream stuff? In some ways, yeah, especially when one of those big factors is you actually own what you are running, what you are buying, what you are installing, as opposed to some proprietary piece of crap that you're taking for granted now, but could just have prices jacked up in the next few months, the next year. I mean, just looking at prices raised on Game Pass or Netflix, I mean, how many people bitch about that, but how many people continue to have an active subscription and eventually just grit their teeth and deal with it? I'd wager probably a lot. And that's what these companies want. They want you to be okay with having less and just having you bled dry. And even as like a gamer, I can't really feel all that bad because I feel like my love for modern AAA gaming is very fucking dead. Like GTA 6 might be the only game I'm really hyped for, as is Resident Evil like 9. But other than that, I really don't have much interest in a lot of AAA shit from these companies going into the future. What I do appreciate is a lot of indie games. Like recently I've been playing stuff like Chef RPG, which literally is made by an independent person and it runs on pretty much anything given what it looks like. And of course, these are the kind of games that I'm more into because you can see that people are actually thinking about gameplay, making in depth products, as opposed to literal like microtransaction filler crap that a lot of these companies are selling to you. Games that are released nowadays woefully unoptimized, games that literally consume a mass amount of resources, and games that now are probably out of economic range for people even trying to build a computer capable of playing those games to begin with. Even looking into the future of gaming consoles, I'm not terribly excited about because I can start to see the writing on the walls, taking away game ownership, stuffing these big AAA experiences with constant microtransactions, battle passes, everything. These are not things that I care too much about. So, honestly, as a gamer who plays video games that are usually 10 years old, anyways, for me, I have so much of a backlog and I might as well just play that on hardware that you can actually, thankfully, still pick up at somewhat affordable prices. Anyways, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. You will know nothing. And I don't think many people should be happy about that. I am out.